The Miracle of the Marne, How Paris Taxis Saved Western Civilization in September 1914. As German jackboots echoed through the cobblestone streets of northern France, Paris held its breath. The seemingly unstoppable grey tide of Kaiser Wilhelm's army had swept through Belgium, crushed the fortress of And, was now bearing down on the City of Light with mechanical precision. What happened next would become one of history's most extraordinary reversals of fortune, a battle so improbable, so dependent on split-second decisions and desperate improvisation, that it would forever be known as the Miracle of the Marne. The perfect plan unravels. The German strategy was breathtaking in its audacity. The Schlieffen Plan, conceived by Count Alfred von Schlieffen and refined for decades, promised to solve Germany's greatest nightmare, a two-front war. Like a massive revolving door, 7 German armies would sweep through Belgium, encircle Paris from the west, and crush France in just 6 weeks before turning east to face the slowly mobilizing Russians. It was military choreography on a continental scale. By early September, the plan seemed flawless in execution. General Alexander von Kluck's First Army had advanced 300 miles in just over a month, covering ground at a pace that would have impressed Napoleon. French forces were in full retreat, their colorful red trousers and blue coats making perfect targets for German machine gunners. The government had fled Paris for Bordeaux, and refugees clogged every road leading south. But in war, as in life, perfection is the enemy of victory. The fatal turn here is where our story takes its first dramatic twist. On September 2nd, as Kluck's army approached the Marne River, he made a decision that would haunt German strategists for generations. Instead of sweeping west of Paris, as the Schlieffen Plan demanded, he turned his army southeast, exposing his right flank to the French Sixth Army positioned in Paris. Why did he do it? Intelligence reports suggested the French Fifth Army was in full retreat and ripe for destruction. Kluck, smelling blood in the water, abandoned the grand strategy to pursue what seemed like an easy kill. It was a hunter's instinct overriding a chessmaster's patience, and it would prove catastrophic. This single decision created a gap between Kluck's First Army and Karl von Bonlow's Second Army, a gap that French aerial reconnaissance would soon discover. In an age when military intelligence still relied heavily on cavalry patrols and visual observation, the airplane had become an unexpected game-changer. French aviators, flying in flimsy wood and canvas machines, spotted the exposed German flank and radioed back intelligence that would alter the course of Western civilization. The Old Bull's last charge enter Marshal Ferdinand Foch, the man who would orchestrate one of history's most audacious counterattacks. At 62, Foch was an unlikely savior, a stocky, mustachioed professor from the French War College who believed that morale could overcome material disadvantage. His philosophy was deceptively simple. My center is giving way, my right is retreating. Situation excellent. I am attacking. But Foch faced a seemingly impossible situation. His forces were scattered, demoralized, and outnumbered. The Germans controlled superior positions along the Marne River, and their artillery had proven devastatingly effective. Most military experts would have recommended continued retreat to regroup behind the Loire River. Instead, Foch saw opportunity in desperation. The German army, after a month of continuous marching and fighting, was exhausted. Their supply lines stretched back hundreds of miles to Germany, and many units were operating at half strength. Most crucially, Kluck's decision to turn southeast had created that fatal gap, a weakness Foch intended to exploit with surgical precision. The taxicab army, perhaps no image from the Battle of the Marne, captures its improvisational spirit better than the sight of Parisian taxis racing toward the front lines packed with French soldiers. General Joseph Gallieni, military governor of Paris, faced a logistical nightmare: how to quickly move 6,000 troops from the capital to reinforce the Sixth Army. The railway system was choked with refugees and military traffic. Requisitioning vehicles would take days they didn't have. Then someone history disputes whether it was Gallieni himself or one of his subordinates suggested commandeering every taxi in Paris. Within hours, 600 red Renault cabs were racing through the French countryside at maximum speed, their meters running, carrying soldiers who would help save France. The bill came to 70,012 francs, roughly $180,000 in today's money. making it perhaps the most expensive taxi ride in history. More importantly, it symbolized the democratic, improvisational spirit that would characterize the Allied war effort. Citizen soldiers transported by civilian vehicles to defend their homeland. The battle that changed everything, the actual fighting, began on September 6, 1914, along a front stretching nearly 200 miles from Paris to Verdun. What followed was not a single battle, but a series of interconnected engagements that would rage for 5 days and determine whether German armies would march down the Champs or be pushed back beyond the frontier. The most critical action occurred in the gap between the German First and Second Armies, where French and British forces launched desperate attacks against surprised German units. The Battle of the Ourcq became a particularly savage affair, with French colonial troops, Algerians, Moroccans, and Senegalese fighting with ferocious determination against German regulars who had expected easy victory. Meanwhile, General Michel-Joseph Montgomery's Sixth Army, reinforced by those famous taxi-transported troops, struck Kluck's exposed right flank. The German general, realizing his perilous position, began withdrawing units from his center to meet this threat, exactly what Foch had hoped for. The miracle unfolds by September 9th. The German position had become untenable. Bülow, fearing encirclement, ordered his Second Army to retreat. Kluck, isolated and facing attack from multiple directions, had no choice but to follow suit. The seemingly unstoppable German war machine was in full retreat for the first time since the war began. The psychological impact was enormous. German soldiers who had been told they were invincible suddenly found themselves running from an enemy they had considered beaten. French morale, which had plummeted during the long retreat, soared as news of the victory spread. The myth of German invincibility lay shattered along the banks of the Marne. The price of victory. The Battle of the Marne cost both sides roughly 250,000 casualties, a staggering toll that foreshadowed the industrial-scale slaughter that would characterize the Great War. But the strategic consequences were even more profound. The German failure to achieve quick victory in the West meant the dreaded two-front war had become reality. Russia mobilized more quickly than anticipated, forcing Germany to divide its forces between East and West. Perhaps most significantly, the battle marked the end of mobile warfare on the Western Front. Both armies, exhausted and bloodied, began digging trenches along the Aisne River. What started as temporary defensive positions would evolve into the elaborate trench systems that would define the next 4 years of warfare. Echoes through history, the Battle of the Marne resonates through history as a reminder that even the best-laid plans can crumble in the face of human courage and adaptability. It demonstrated that in war, as in life, victory often belongs not to the strongest or best equipped, but to those who can think quickly, adapt rapidly, and seize fleeting opportunities. The taxicabs of Paris became symbols of democratic resistance, proof that ordinary citizens could play extraordinary roles in determining their nation's fate. And Ferdinand Foch, the aging professor who refused to accept defeat, would go on to become Supreme Allied Commander, leading the coalition that would ultimately triumph in 1918. In the end, the Battle of the Marne saved more than just Paris. It preserved the possibility that democracy and freedom could survive in an increasingly mechanized and militarized world. Sometimes, as September 1914 proved, miracles are not divine interventions, but the result of human beings refusing to surrender when surrender seems the only rational choice.